Being an informed voter means knowing the candidates and the voting schedule.
Now, this is where you need to get your pen and paper out. May 14th is the first day of early voting. May 22nd is the last day to apply for a ballot by mail. May 25th is the last day of early voting. That all leads up to May 29th, primary election day. So mark your calendars and please go vote.
Political affiliation is one way to choose a candidate in a general election, but in a primary, you're picking between people who all play on the same team. We asked voters what specific qualities they look for in a candidate before deciding who to support.
It would be my hope that a candidate would be able to take really large ideas and get rid of the jargon and communicate them to just everyday Americans in a way that's not deceptive.
I'm looking for someone who's going to be fairly progressive, who will not be afraid to take a strong stand on issues that might be controversial.
Candidates who've been there, done that, bought and sold the t-shirt, and they have some real world experience.
I'm always looking for candidates that seem to be smart because there's so much they have to learn so fast that I always want someone who can get up to speed and be a bit of a policy wonk.
As the former mayor of Dallas, our next candidate is used to representing over 1 million people in the third biggest city in Texas. Republican Tom Leppert says running one of the country's largest construction companies puts him in a position to help rebuild America. Here are Laurie and Dave with Republican Tom Leppert.
Thanks for coming by this evening.
It's great being with you.
Well, you know, one thing that we hear from a lot of people, they'll say, the political insiders will say, this race is already gone to Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst. What do you say to the folks?
Well,
I
tell them in a lot of ways the race has just started. It has just come up on television now. A lot of folks just haven't focused on this, I think in part because we focused a little bit later. And on top of that, with the changes in the dates and those sorts of things. I can tell you as we go around the state, we have seen an awful lot of momentum that's built up. Clearly, we're able to communicate that we're not one of those career politicians, somebody that's actually got that business background, that business understanding. I don't just talk about creating jobs or cutting spending. I've actually done it. And I can tell you that resonates with the people across the state of Texas.
Is it discouraging at all to know, though, that not many people know the Senate race is happening at this point?
Well, I think more and more people are. And I think that they are going to focus on it. They understand how important the issues are. Again, I get a chance to visit all across Texas. People are worried about the economy. They're worried about the jobs. They've seen the fiscal mess in Washington with what career politicians have done. And they really want new leadership. But they're also asking for something else. They're asking for real solutions. We've laid out what we believe is the most detailed, comprehensive economic plan. We talk about taxes, we talk about spending, regulation. How do you change the culture in Washington with real solutions? The entitlement programs is an example with real solutions. And I think that's what people want. I think they're tired of people dealing in bullet points and platitudes. I think they understand that the challenges that are out there are real, they're significant. We can't approach it the same way that we've been approaching it.
Speaking of that frustration with Washington, it seems like a lot of voters are concerned about the partisanship, about Democrats and Republicans being unwilling to work together to fix problems. And, you know, what issues would you be willing to compromise on? Are there areas where you feel like there doesn't need to be this hard line?
Well, I think in the end, that's what I offer as much as anything else. You know, when you run organizations, and I've run businesses in 5 different industries, small and medium all the way to large, a lot of times you work with people that you don't necessarily agree with and sometimes you don't like. But you still have to produce the results. I've never had to compromise my principles, but I've always been able to frame it in the right way, put a real solution out on the table, and then get people to come over. That's clearly what I had to do in the city of Dallas. In an environment where I had actually more people on the other end of the political spectrum than mine, I think we framed it in ways that people could understand. We moved a city to good, strong, fiscally conservative principles at a time when it was a very difficult economy. We had a clear priority that people looked at us, e.g. public safety. We reduced the crime rate by 1/3 in the space of 3 years. We increased the police force by 20%. But in a difficult time, we also had to make some tough choices, some tough fiscal choices. We reduced the civilian workforce by 20%. A lot of programs the government was in, they shouldn't have been in and they weren't doing effectively, so we eliminated those, found different ways to do operations. And all that, again, bringing people together and getting things done that Dallas people said couldn't get done for 20 years. So I think that's one of the real issues in Washington. You're absolutely right. Everybody wants to argue, but again, a lot of it's career politicians that love to go make speeches, but they don't do anything that affects you and me.
What would you not want to compromise on? What would be an issue you can't budge on?
Well, I think there's clearly some faith issues that are important to me.
Such as?
Right to life. That would be one. That's a faith issue to me. I think it's an important one, and I cannot see compromising in that in any way.
Let's talk about the energy industry, and up in your neck of the woods there, up in Dallas, Fort Worth, Barnett Shale, right?
Yeah.
Big explosion of work going on, drilling for a lot of natural gas, and of course now they want to shift to oil with the price of oil going up. Some would say, though, and there's a lot of controversy over what gets paid by those operators when they extract the oil and gas for taxes, for royalties, for fees. The industry says we pay too much of that already. Do they, or should they be paying more?
Well, again, sometimes facts actually make a difference. Oil companies actually pay more in taxes than they do in terms of the profits that they generate. Now, we can sit here and kind of go back and forth, but the reality of it ought to be a free market that identifies it. Our challenges on energy are pretty straightforward. You know, for too long, the regulatory issues have been what the problem is. We don't have an energy problem. We've got the resources in this country. You touched on some of them, but there's some other ones. Oil in terms of Alaska, other parts of drilling, which is domestic right here in our home state of Texas. We need to keep in mind that we use a very, very small percentage of the resources that are out there for energy that we've got available. In one way or another, nearly 90%, some of the surveys say 90% or more of energy resources are off the table for one reason or another because of regulatory. We don't have an energy problem, we've got a regulatory problem. What we need to do is open up so we can utilize the reserves and then understand, again, not just in energy. We can address national security issues by reducing about 4.5 million barrels a day that we bring from folks to, put it nice, don't like us and would like to see harm done to us. Plus, over the course of the next 10 years, we've got to generate about 20 million jobs in this economy. If we open up the energy resources, we're going to get 2 million plus or minus 2 million jobs that are going to come. Those are going to be important for our economy. And
you touched on regulation, and of course that's a huge issue with the energy industry. And up again in your neck of the woods there, where people are now seeing what fracking does, and they're worried about some literal things that it does to their roads that they see, but then they're also worried about the air they breathe and what sort of releases of gas there might be. How do you balance that, especially in a place like Texas, where so many people live near these operations, whether they're the refineries down here on the Ship Channel or whether they're the fracking operations up in your part of North Texas, trying to balance, let the work get done, let the people make money doing it, but let's not endanger people who live and breathe and drink the water out of the streams.
And I think in a lot of ways you answered it with the word balance. For too long, we've gone so far in the other direction that we've hurt our economy, we've hurt our position in the world, the national security
issues,
regulation, those sort of things, with too much regulation, and that's really clear. You go and talk to small businesses all over this state. They'll tell you between Dodd-Franks, between SOX, and on, that the regulation over the last several years has thwarted their opportunities. And you see it in real numbers. One of the things that has always been at the core of our country, that entrepreneurial spirit, is startups. You know, startups have always been a source of an enormous amount of jobs for us. Startups are at the lowest level they've been in 30 and 40 years. The reason's very simple. It's the regulation and the taxes. We've taken that entrepreneurial spirit. We've unfortunately put a cap over it. We need to open that up so that we get the innovation, but we also get the jobs and get a strong growth economy. That's what it is. For too long, Washington's overspent, overtaxed, and overregulated, and that explains a lot of our economic problems.
Obviously, a lot of these regulatory issues directly affect consumers on the other end. And we've been asking this over and over again tonight. Is it intellectually dishonest to imply that politicians can affect the price at the pump?
They absolutely can. Again, opening up the resources provides more resources. Clearly the challenge, look at those 4.5 million barrels a day that we bring from the Middle East. I mean, the reality of the Middle East and Venezuela. Look at that. If we opened our resources up, all indications are ANWR is going to produce more oil than we received off of Prudhoe Bay. You mentioned the opportunities that we've got on natural gas. Again, not only for uses of it, but think of, again, not in terms of problems, but in terms of opportunities. With that availability, why don't we think of starting to export that? We're starting to move towards that, but starting to utilize that. That gives balance in payments, advantages, all of those sorts of things. If we can put more resources, two things happen. One, the price comes down, but just as importantly, the stability issue. Part of the issues that we're challenged with now are the problems in the Middle East. If we were more energy independent, then all of a sudden those issues wouldn't affect Americans. That's why it's important that we utilize the resources, that we open up the resources that we have, and understand that we frame it the right way. It's a regulatory problem, not an energy problem. We've got the resources.
Switch gears a little bit, and
Sure.
We've been talking tonight about social media and having people write in their thoughts via social media. What role does that play in your life, and are you more of an observer of it, or do you participate a lot in social media?
Probably in the middle somewhere. Clearly an awful lot of computer use and that sort of thing, and get different communications and that sort of thing. It's been an important part of our campaign. We've seen significant growth in what we've done in terms of the Facebook and Twitter accounts and those sorts of things. So it's been important for the account, and I probably fall kind of in the middle of it. I use it and increasingly are using it.
As a mayor, did you find that it helps you be better in touch with your constituents? Did you find out things that maybe a decade ago you might not have found out in the way that you do today?
I can tell you, mayor is probably about the most accountable position that you can find. Most of my accountability came when I was at the grocery store in the checkout line.
Face to face, not Facebook. Okay.
Absolutely.
I want to ask you about the Bush-era tax cuts. The Congressional Budget Office has said that if those tax cuts are extended, it would add another $3 trillion to the national debt over the next decade. And Republicans have said they want to extend all the cuts. Democrats have said they only want to extend cuts for the poor and middle class. Where do you stand on that? Do you support it, oppose it? Are you somewhere in the middle?
We should extend those tax cuts, but I've gone much further than that. We need to change the tax system. It's 70,000 pages. There's a special deal for everybody out there. And unfortunately, it's become so convoluted. 70,000 pages. So what we've proposed, again, not just to talk about it in round terms, but to actually put a real solution out there, a tax program that flattens, brings the rates down, gets rid of the junk, and makes it much simpler. On the corporate side, we do the same thing. Our tax rate today for corporations is 35%. Now, a lot of businesses here in Houston pay 35%, especially the small and medium ones. But you've got businesses on the East Coast that make billions of dollars. They don't pay any taxes. Bring the rate down so it's competitive in the world. It doesn't have to be the lowest. We have to be competitive. I propose 19%, and get rid of the junk. So all businesses are treated the same. See, that's what a lot of people don't understand, is government understands how to talk to big business. But the small and medium-sized businesses are really the ones that drive this economy. And they're the ones that don't have thousands of tax lawyers, and they don't have all the lobbyists in Washington. So if you see somebody that's got all the lobbyists behind them, you know what they're going to do in Washington. We've got to open this thing up with a tax system that is fair, that's fair to all Americans, that's much simpler, and that importantly drives the economy. Because that's what was lacking in your question. And it's the perception of Washington. It's one group versus another. That's the wrong way to frame it. We need to frame it as taxes, regulation. How do we get this economy moving? How do we produce opportunities for our young people?
How do you do that? What's the one thing you can say Washington ought to be doing right now that is not doing that would benefit average Americans when it comes to the economy and getting things going?
Again, I wish there was a silver bullet. There's not. It's going to take real solutions, and we've laid that out. Part of it is the tax, which we talked about just a moment ago. Another part of it's the spending. It's putting discipline in the system, but it's also having real solutions on the entitlement programs. And again, we've laid those out. It's taking regulation. I'm a business person. It's not, you don't eliminate all regulation, but at least get it to be reasonable. Talk about what we do on energy as a regulatory issue and open that up. Repeal Obamacare, but also do things that bring the private enterprise back into it, the doctor, the patient, so they're at the core of it. Bring the cost down. And then finally, how do you change the culture in Washington? You know, it's ridiculous to think that the people that in theory are serving us have pensions and health care plans that there's no business in Houston can afford. That's hypocritical. But that's what we've got. All the messages are we serve them, they don't serve us. That's got to change.
Very good. And that perfectly timed. We're out of time.
Terrific. It's good being with you. Thanks for having me.
Likewise. Thank you.
Tonight's program is being televised live from the Melcher Center for Public Broadcasting at the University of Houston and is being broadcast on PBS and NPR stations statewide.
It's also being streamed live on the Texas Tribune website, texastribune.org. For more information about KUHT and NPR, go to our website at HoustonPBS.org or KUHF.org.
The entire election process is about meeting the candidates, hearing their positions on issues, and learning about their priorities. The internet and specifically social media are changing the way campaigns get the word out to potential voters. At the top of the show, we told you about our live social media blog that's happening on HoustonPBS.org and KUHF.org. Twitter and Facebook are buzzing with comments after our first 3 candidate conversations. We're still looking for candidate questions, though, so get online, join the conversation, and submit your questions for tonight's Senate conversations. Before we asked you the candidates questions that you needed to ask yourself. And which is more important when choosing who to vote for, real-world experience or a strong political background?
I think there's a good reason to have real-world experience, but at the same time, I do think there needs to be some political experience. Just so you got to know how the game works and know how to play the game. You can't come in and this is the way it's going to happen. It just can't happen that way. So I think a little bit of both.
I think there's value to both. I like people who have not spent their entire career in politics but have some real-world experience. But I do worry about someone who's not had any political experience going right into a very big job like U.S. Senator.
Real world experience in either job creation or even working for many years for a company. That would be important.
Whatever a person's life experience is, hopefully they get to the Senate and can learn and can facilitate compromise.
Our next candidate is no stranger to Texas politics. He served in the Texas House of Representatives for more than a decade. A lawyer by trade, Democrat Paul Sadler wants to take what he's learned about Texas voters to Washington. Here are Laurie and Dave with Democrat Paul Sadler.
Mr. Sadler, thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
The last time a Texas Democrat served in the U.S. Senate was 1993, when Bob Kruger was appointed to continue Lloyd Benson's term. He lost the general election to Kay Bailey Hutchison. What makes you think you can reverse a 20-year losing streak for the Democrats?
Well, I think Texas is a very independent state, and I think that the people of Texas are looking for someone that will serve with respect and dignity, someone that can get things done. I have a record of leadership, a record of accomplishment in a bipartisan manner. I've passed some of the largest bills substantive-wise in our state, from the entire education code to 3 teacher pay raises to the largest property tax cut in the history of our state at the time, and at the same time increased funding for schools. I did that at a time when we had a Republican Senate and a Democratic House that was almost equally divided. I've worked with Democratic governors and Republican governors and lieutenant governors. And so I think people are looking for problem solvers. I think they've had enough of the soundbite. We wake up every morning to a pantomime message that everyone seems to repeat on the same cadence. And they're looking for independent people that will solve problems. And that's my history. And I ask people to look at that record. And, you know, we all sit around each other's coffee tables in this state and we say, well, you know, I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat, but I would look at the person. Well, that's what I'm going to ask you to do. Look at the person, look at the record, see who's really accomplished things for the people of Texas.
Talk about education. The Houston Endowment recently did a study where they looked at kids that were back in junior high back in the mid-1990s, I think, and they found, especially among minority students in Texas, that only 1 in 10 or so, 11%, were ever going on to any higher education, getting any kind of certificate. And the report warned that is basically a recipe for disaster in the terms of you're going to slip behind national national goals for education. What does that scare you? And I know you've given this a lot of thought, but that does not sound like a recipe for a healthy state.
Well, it's not just our state, it's all across the country. And it is troublesome. It's always been troublesome. Middle school are the hardest years. Not only are there physical developments, there's peer pressure. For most kids, they're also facing algebra for the first time and things of that nature. And so there are tremendous pressures. And the fact of the matter is that once we lose a child back to the streets, we never get them back. And so back in the mid-90s, when Senator Ratliff was in the Senate, chaired the Education Senate, and I chaired Education in the House, we made the determination that we weren't going to expel kids. We were going to, if there were discipline problems, we would suspend them, but we would keep them in the program. We would continue to educate them because we knew that we had to get them through the system, give them the opportunity to go to higher ed and have a better life. Those dynamics haven't changed, and they haven't changed in education. But the thing I've learned over the years, and particularly listening to people as they come testifying and touring and walking through schools, that the single most important ingredient in a child's education is the parent. A parent involved in a local school in connection with the teacher and the administrators has the best chance of having a successful student. And when we lose the parents, or the parents get too busy, we often lose the child. And that's not only a minority or majority issue, that's just a parent-child issue. If you're there making sure your child does their homework, is on school on time, is keeping up, you have a much better chance of having your child graduate and go on.
And Texas keeps growing, though, and yet, as I understand it, the budget is not keeping up with the funding to account for that growth in Texas, especially among minority children. Do you think that is going to have to change if we don't want some dire consequences?
Well, you have to be concerned at what's happening with funding in education in Texas. I mean, unless you've just been asleep. I mean, we just cut $5.2 billion out of education. We just, for the first time in the known history of our state, did not cover enrollment growth. You have to be concerned with that. You end up with not only an adequacy question, but eventually you're going to have an equity situation. And there's a funny thing about money in schools. I mean, money doesn't guarantee a good education. I've already told you that. I mean, it's parental involvement, it's a very good teacher, it's a strong principal, there are a lot of dynamics. But money is very important as well, to staff it, to have the curriculum needs, to have the type of building you need. It's kind of that old adage, the only people that complain about, that say money's not important, are those that have it. The ones that don't understand how important it is. So our programming, you just have to be concerned whenever you see those kind of cuts. And I can tell you, as chairman of public education, I fought those battles. I passed school finance bills. I gave teacher pay raises. The one thing I can tell you is I never walked off the floor and turned my back on the children of this state. I always made sure that there was funding. And the people that served in the House with me, both Republicans and Democrats, stood up together and said, we're going to do this. And it's very disheartening to me, and it's very concerning to me, that we would have leadership in this state that would not fund our educational needs.
Let's talk about Washington a little bit. If you're elected, you'll be heading there. And what do you think should be done differently there right now, if anything, to improve the economy, to improve the situation for average Americans?
If you look at the problems surrounding the federal government and our economy, the vortex, the very center of that, I believe, is our national debt. There are a lot of terms that get thrown around. Deficit, surplus, those are terms that deal with the current budget. Sitting over here is this national debt. That national debt is accumulated through deficits. And our current national debt began before Ronald Reagan was president and has been contributed to by every single president along the way. Every single president's contributed to that national debt. So there's plenty of blame to go around. But in the last administration, in the Bush administration, we doubled our national debt. And we did it because we passed the Bush tax cuts, which was the single largest contributor to our national debt. And we had a war in Iraq and a war in Afghanistan, which we didn't fully fund. And we kept being told that deficit spending during wartime is okay. Well, now we've doubled our national debt. Now it's over $15 trillion. You cannot, if you want to be honest with the people of Texas, and I intend to be, you cannot cut your way out of that national debt, and you can't grow the economy out of that national debt. It's going to take those two things plus one. It's going to take additional revenue. And anyone that tells you otherwise is not being truthful to you. You can look at the numbers. We have a revenue stream of $2.3 trillion. We have a budget of over $3 trillion. You can cut $1 trillion out of our budget, but you're still just making ends meet. You haven't touched that national debt of $15+ trillion. Yet we know that if we simply let the Bush taxes expire, we can reduce that national debt in half over the next 5 to 9 years. Now, why is that important to us? We pay over 7% of our federal budget every year as interest on that national debt. Let's put that in perspective. That's more than we spend in education, highway infrastructure, scientific and medical research. It's more than we spend in education and scientific research combined. We're spending on interest on a national debt that doubled during the Bush administration, but has been contributed by all of us. And the fact is that we're all going to have to pay eventually to get it done. And people that simply say we're going to grow the economy and get rid of a $15 trillion debt are not being honest with you. And people that say we're going to cut spending in the federal budget, cut it. You're going to cut all of the federal budget? If you do, it's still going to take you 7 years to pay the national debt. That's if we have no federal government at all.
So are you talking both doing away with the Bush tax cuts, but then also raising taxes as well in order to address that?
There are three things we have to do. Two things plus one. First off, we have to cut spending. There is waste in government. There's always waste in government. You can always find some. In fact, the super committee, I think, has identified almost $350 billion that they can agree to already. So we've got to scrub the budget. We have to try to find as much waste and reduce. We have to get within our means of our budget. That's the second thing. We have to learn to live within the stream of revenue, whatever that may be. We have to allow our economy to grow. The third thing that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to let those Bush tax cuts go in order to pay down the national debt. Because at the end of the day, if you look at the budget, and any of you that are honest and will look at it, if you look at the budget, you get down to our military and defense spending or the Bush tax cuts. And you're going to have to make a choice. And I'm telling you that if you look at the numbers, allowing those Bush tax cuts to expire, we can reduce our national debt over the next 5 to 9 years. Now, why is that important? It is my belief, and I think borne out, that what is holding Wall Street, what is holding our business community hostage right now is concern over that. People are afraid to invest. They see that mountain of debt. They don't know what the plan is to get rid of it. They know it impacts our financial strategy. They know it impacts our standing in the world. And like every other public corporation or other matter, if we will design a plan to eliminate that national debt, you'll see corporate America, you'll see the business of this country take off again.
Let's try to get in one other topic, immigration. What do you think makes more sense, going after the illegal immigrant who's working at a plant or wherever, or go after the owner of that business and prosecute them for hiring undocumented workers?
Well, you're assuming, let me back up a minute. I'm not of the opinion that we need to go out and arrest every single undocumented worker and ship them out of here. I think that we've got to focus on those that have had trouble with the law and are not good abiding citizens. We have tremendous contributions being made to our economy and to our society by people who are undocumented workers. And we need to find a way to give them a pathway to citizenship. And to do otherwise really doesn't make a lot of sense. We don't have the manpower or the money to go round everybody up and deport them. We simply don't. And there should be a clear, reasonable pathway for those people that are here, they're working, they're paying taxes, they're learning English language, and they haven't committed a crime.
So leave the business owners alone, though?
Well, the business owner we need to enforce the law that's already on the books. It's already illegal to hire an illegal or an undocumented worker. So, I mean, we don't need new law to do that. But I do think that we've got to reform our immigration policy to be realistic about where we are. And this notion that these people that have been here, some of them 20 years, 15 years, that are working and they're shopping at Walmart and they're going to H-E-B and they're renting homes where property taxes are being paid, they're paying taxes, they're contributing.
We're out of time, but
okay.
We thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.